All right, so our next guest here is an inspiring one. Again, Alex Honnold, one of my favorites, a professional climber known for his unbelievable and breathtaking free solo climbs, which basically means he climbs mountains without any safety equipment. Alex really shot to recognition when he was filmed during his climb of El Capitan, a 3,000-foot high wall in Yosemite National Park. That climb was then turned into a Academy Award-winning documentary called Free Solo. Go watch it. In addition to all of his climbing work, he also started the Honnold Foundation, which funds organizations with innovative solutions to new energy sources in marginalized communities. You're going to love this one. All right, so welcome back to the Zach Clark Show. Very special guest today that needs little introduction. Alex Honnold, the star of Free Solo. He just spoke at the conference we're having here in Las Vegas, which is his hometown. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I don't know anything about the show. I'm excited to see where we go.
We're gonna go places. Probably not exciting as exciting as some of your adventures, but we are here, and the irony here is our show or our conference. My work is around substance abuse. You know, I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. And during your talk, you just mentioned the irony of never doing a drug, never drinking, or not really being into that world. Is that because you have no interest? Is rock climbing your drug? Like that's where I'm starting, because I'm so curious about that.
Yeah, it's partially because I've never had that much interest. It's partially also because I knew that it'd be a tricky path for me, because I'm very bad with moderation, and when I'm into something, I'm really freaking into something, and I go big. And there's certain things that I'm like, I probably just shouldn't go big in that. You know, like I like to joke with friends that I just haven't started drinking yet, but when I do, I'm going to really start. You know, I'm like kind of joking about being old and like drinking red wine or whatever, but I'm also kind of like, there's a kernel of truth in that. I'm sort of like, oh, it's probably better I don't start.
Unbelievable. And what age did you start climbing?
I started climbing when I was 10.
10 years old.
And also, it's not totally true to say that I've never done anything, because I've taken sips of things. You know, people have obviously like offered me drinks, and I've taken a sip here and there. Part of it's that I've never liked the taste of alcohol, and I didn't go to college, so I never had quite the social, push to get over that distaste. And also, I hate carbonation, so I don't like bubbles, like I don't like bubbly stuff. And so then that's a further impediment to drinking a lot of alcohol, or like drinking beer, stuff like that. I'm just like, oh, I think it's gross, I don't like it. And I've just never quite overcame. I feel like a lot of people like didn't like it, but then they're in college and they're forced to, and then they start to like it, and then they like the way it makes them feel or whatever. Right. And I just like never overcame the hurdles.
In the climbing culture, like, because I'm imagining it's a lot of people who are, have to really be gung ho about it. Is alcohol or substances, is that ever a world inside of that? People that you've known?
Oh yeah, substance use is very common. I mean, there's tons of. In the 70s and 80s, like climbing culture, drug use was a big deal, like very countercultural, like, hippies, Stonemaster stuff, like LSD, very common. And then modern stuff is probably more around like, mushrooms and weed and whatever. But yeah, substance abuse has always been a big part of, maybe not abuse, but substance use has been a big part of climbing. Wow. And alcohol, yeah, climbers definitely know how to cut loose in their own ways.
The thing I'm thinking about here is, so for the listeners, if you don't know Alex's story, it's extremely inspiring, which kind of culminated in this 3,000-foot free solo, right? Am I using the right language? Where you basically climbed the face of this mountain attached to nothing. You just walked up to this face and climbed it, correct?
That's with years of training and practice, all that. But yeah, basically, on that day, I just walked up and climbed a thing. It's crazy.
But like, that was an idea that came to you. Jimmy Chin, he's a climber. And so when you first got thrown that idea of let's film this experience of you climbing El Capitan?
No. So it's actually really good luck, the timing of the film. The film Free Solo came about, basically, Jimmy and Chai, the co-directors of the film and friends of mine, approached me about doing a feature film project. And they didn't know anything about El Cap. They just wanted to do a feature film project on me and the climbing I was doing and whatever. And by sheer coincidence, that was like the exact same time that I had finally decided that I was going to put personal effort into free soloing El Cap. I was like, this is my thing. Because I'd been dreaming about it for 7 years or something at that point. And I'd kept hoping that it would just kind of happen in a way that I would drive into Yosemite, I'd look at the wall and be like, this is the year, like now it looks easy. And after 7 years of it never looking easy, I kind of realized that it was never going to look easy. I was going to have to do all the work and just find out if it was possible. And then they approached me like right at that same time that I decided like, this is the year I'm going to start like actually doing the work. And I was like, oh, perfect. Because if it's a film thing, then it's, you know, in a way it's like an accountability buddy or something, you know, somebody to like help you, hold you accountable to this like project that you want to do anyway. So then it was like really good synergistic time. We just started working on this project.
If there's no film, do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I was aspiring to do it either way. But the thing is, I mean, there are a couple things going on that are sort of like more subtle than what you see in the film. So one thing is that to do the prep to free solo cap, there's a ton of labor involved, like carrying ropes to the summit of the wall and then rappelling in. And then after you rappel in, you have to pull all your ropes back up and put them away, which means it's like, you know, sometimes hundreds of pounds of gear that you're moving around.
This is the prep.
Yeah, this is all the like working on it. And so if I was going to free solo cap totally by myself, I would still have to do all that same prep work. I'd still have to carry all the ropes up there and do that, but I'd be doing it all totally by myself. And you're like, that's a lot of work. It's like really hard. It's tiring. It just takes a long time. And then moreover, if you're doing it totally by yourself, anybody else in Yosemite, and you know, El Cap is a popular wall, like, and there's a road underneath it. People just go into the meadow and they watch people climb with binoculars and stuff. Basically, if I'd spent a couple weeks by myself going up and down on El Cap, it would be super obvious that I'm hoping to free solo El Cap. And I was like, I want to be a little more discreet and spend the time that I need. And in some ways, the film project surprisingly was actually a really good cover for the stuff we were doing, because every time climbers are like, what are you guys doing up here?
Right.
You'd be like, oh, we're shooting this thing for National Geographic. And they're like, sick, about the national parks. And you're like, yeah. You know, you're like, whatever. You don't have to be too specific about it, but you're just like, we're up here doing a film project. And so then it kind of makes sense that you're up on the wall day in and day out for weeks at a time.
And they're hanging on the wall with cameras, you know, filming you climbing, preparation, and also when you actually did the actual climb, right? And they're using drones. Like
no drones, because it's a national park, so it's illegal.
Oh, right.
But,
wow.
But yeah, so they're just up on the wall going up and down with me. And actually, and so that was part of the reason that I wanted to do the film, was because a lot of the prep work is actually easier when you have somebody with you. Like the rappelling in and dealing with all the ropes is kind of easier as two than with one. And so then it kind of makes sense, because the person with you is the filmer, and he's like filming the whole process. But in this case, all the people that worked on that film are all elite climbers as well. Yeah. And so they're basically just up there helping you do the thing. And yeah, so it's like one of the main camera guys, this guy Mikey Schaefer, the two of us rappelled El Cap together like a dozen times. You know, and like each time I'd be working on different sections, he'd be filming that preparation. But the reality is that it's the two of us hiking to the summit of the wall together and then rappelling the whole face together. And you're like, that's a tremendous amount of effort. You know, it's just a lot of work, and it like helped to have a team for it.
I'm fascinated by the psychology here, and when I look at people who are at the highest level, right? I think about a Michael Jordan or whoever it might be, right? The greatest athletes of all time, the greatest businessmen of all time. They all have this thing where they're almost fearless, I guess, in their craft, or they're obsessed. I mean, can you take us through, like, do you think you are psychologically different than most, or do you just believe that you have this extreme purpose and passion in your life that you're willing to do anything to get to the highest level? I mean, it's...
No, I don't think I'm that different. I think in some ways I've been really lucky that I'm really into one thing that I love, and I've pushed hard at it forever. Because, you know, I have some friends who are more generalists. You know, they're like pretty good at a bunch of different things, but I'm like not really that good at anything else. But I've gotten quite good at the one thing that I love to do. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's just one of those things.
But what do you like? I mean, I have so many things like in my head, because like it's definitely just not one of those things. You know what I mean? Like you are like a phenomenon. You know, like I was an athlete. Zach was an athlete. Like it was.
No, yeah, so I think, you know, there are 9 billion people on Earth.
Yeah.
And yeah, everybody has their own little thing, and I think for whatever reason I was dealt a certain set of cards, and I've played them well, and I like them. And I'm kind of like, yeah, you know, with 9 billion people, you're going to get some freaking weirdos doing weird things, and it just like works out for them. And I don't know, it's just good luck in a lot of ways.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you think there's a luck that plays into this? And it sounds like you sort of have absorbed that, and you're like, yeah, this is part of the equation, and I'm just sort of moving through this, and this is what I do. Has there ever been a time when you're like, you know what, I don't want to get out of fucking bed and hang by the the wood.
Yeah, that's called a rest day. Every once in a while, you're like, I just can't fucking train today. Are we allowed to curse?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, please.
And if we ask you something that if you're like, I don't like we can edit it out, like, but like, because I am fascinated, man. Like it's exceptional, really.
No, I think. But what you're seeing is the result of basically 30 years of consistent effort, and you're saying that is incredible. But the day-to-day, each day you wake up being like, man, I could have done more. I should have tried harder. Like maybe I should have done it with a little more intensity. Maybe I should have eaten better. Like maybe I shouldn't have, should have had more of a plan. I look at my life and I'm constantly like, man, I should have been training more in different ways or harder, or smarter. Like I only see the things I could do better. But when you're just looking big picture at the results, you're like, that's amazing. You're kind of like, yeah, but I mean, it could have been even better if I worked harder, but I just didn't quite have the motivation, and I didn't, Like that's, I don't know.
I just like this word. So for me, right? Like at 27 years old, I'm a heroin addict. I'm smoking crack. I'm out of my mind, right? So I needed to make this change in my life, which is where I got sober, right? And so I knew from that moment forward, after going to rehab, that I had to do one thing every day, which was to stay sober. And by doing that and building that consistency in my life, I was able to build something that was pretty cool. Like, how much of this journey that you've been on do you attribute to just being consistent day in and day out, and not like waving off of the path that you talked about, the path all the time in your talk?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is just consistency. And I think that for me, I've been lucky that it's easy for me to stay consistent in this thing because I love doing the thing so much. I mean, I imagine that in recovery it's much harder because you're trying to stay consistent in something that you don't necessarily love, or I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, it's just less clear that like the path is the easy path or whatever. But no, I think for me, I don't know. I just love doing the thing.
It's just wild to me, man, though, because like I'm a marathoner, right? Like I've run 15 marathons. I've had this journey as a marathon runner where like I started out as a 4.5 hour guy, and now I'm trying to break 3 hours. But there are so many people
marathon.
that are so much faster than me, and so it becomes like a personal vision quest. Because if I start to look at the other people, I'm screwed. But you're at the highest level. Like, there's really no one better than you.
Well, no, I'm at a high level in free soloing, but in all other aspects of climbing, I'm, elite, but not at the highest level. You know what I mean? And it's a lot like, it's maybe not quite akin to your marathon, but I'd be, if say a global standard for marathoning is aspiring to sub 2 hours, I'd be running like a 2:15 marathon where you're like, oh, that's a really good marathon, but it's not close to elite, and I couldn't run sub 2 even if I tried my hardest. And so that's the thing in climbing. I'm a really good climber. Like I can climb at a high level, but I can't run the equivalent of a sub 2 hour marathon in climbing.
Right.
But I can go ultra running or whatever. Like that's the thing, is that a lot of this free soloing stuff is almost more akin to ultra running, like 100-mile races, things like that. It's almost like a whole different thing on trail that like people don't do, or like sky running. You know what I mean? Like running ridges and like kind of extreme European running races, things like that. I don't know. I mean, sports analogies start to fail at a certain point, but it's like, I'm good at this particular thing that I like to do, and obviously I'm a good all around climber, but I'm by no means the best at any other aspect of climbing.
Right, but just to be clear, like free soloing means that you're climbing with no rope. It's just just you, naked hands, and you're just pulling yourself up.
Ideally, I have clothes on, but yeah,
you got clothes on. Well, I'm sure you got some crazy stories, but I mean, when you were showing in the movie where you have that little ridge where you have to basically put half of your body inside of the mountain to like pull yourself up, and then you come out of that, and you're like, your body feels like jello. And then you got to keep going. Are you, in that moment, are you like, all right, I need 2 minutes of recovery, and then I go back in? Or is it like every time you come out of that moment, you're like, I don't know how my body's going to feel today, but I'll just react, and then I'll continue on?
No, I mean, with climbing El Cap, a lot of it is pacing, where it's like I'm just climbing it away at such a pace that it feels sustainable. Like as I climb it, when I get to the next move, I'll feel good on that move. Like basically I just kind of cruise along at a steady pace the whole time. So ideally, there's never any like I have to take a break or have to, there were places where I stopped, I like ate and drank in a few places, and I like peed off ledges here and there, like anytime you have to pee. And I tightened and loosened my shoes quite a lot, which is a whole thing in climbing, because climbing shoes are very tight and relatively uncomfortable. So on easy terrain, I'd keep my shoes kind of loose, and then on hard terrain, I'd have them laced super, super tight. kind of like ski boots or something, where if you're trying to like really do something, you have super tight, high performance footwear.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so, there's a lot of like modulation to my effort in that way, but generally you're just cruising up this 3,000 foot wall,
Yeah.
But with free soloing it, I was trying to maintain a steady pace and like good momentum, because you're like, I'm trying to do something hard, and you want to sort of, a lot like running a race where you just want to like feel good the whole time, and so you want to maintain a consistent pace.
But there's this humility about you, and I'm trying to, and if I seem rattled almost, it's because I just watched you give this hour-long talk. You had the whole room captivated. You're showing clips from this movie that are mind-bending. It's just mind-bending. And to you, it's just like, yeah, I worked really hard and I did it. And then someone will ask you a question about inspiring others, and you're kind of just like, well, that's nice. Like there doesn't seem to be any ego, or I'm trying to put a word to it, but where does that come from?
So there is some ego. Obviously I'm proud of the things that I've done. I put a lot of effort into it. I'm glad that people appreciate it and whatever, because like I've literally spent my whole life working at this, and I'm like, oh, I'm glad that other people think that's cool, because, I put a lot of work into it. But part of it's just, I don't know, I'm just doing my thing. It's, if people are psyched, great. If people aren't psyched, you're like, that's fine. I'll just keep doing my thing.
Is that a typical mentality among climbers, you think, or no, you can't generalize like that?
A little bit, and I think particularly, I started climbing 30 years ago, and climbing was very different then, much more niche, much more fringe. Climbing now is relatively mainstream, in that you can go to a climbing gym in any city, and
speed climbing in the Olympics.
Yeah, actually in sport climbing too. So there were 2 medals in the Olympics. I went to the Olympics this summer actually to do some interviewing and stuff,
cool.
And it was incredible. But anyway, climbing has grown up a lot, but it's always been a pretty fringe niche thing. Like, you have to be a particular kind of person to choose to take risks in the mountains by yourself, and so I don't know. I think there's always been a lot of intrinsic motivation around climbing. Like, no one's pressuring you to go climb. It has to come from within, and you have to be into it.
Has it been corporatized in the sense of people coming, oh, all right, like, this guy's got a certain presence online or social media, we sell this? Has that affected, have you seen that effect?
I think that's been the fear, especially with Olympic climbing and all that, there'll be more money in the sport. Personally, I think it's great, because it just, even if it means like more people sell out or whatever, it just kind of means that more people can make a living through climbing. And it means that, because a lot of my friends, not just professional climbers, but a lot of my friends make a living through the peripheral climbing world, like through coaching, through being nutritionists, through whatever. People who are very serious climbers who would never be at the highest level, like getting paid to rock climb, but now they can get paid to be a coach or to teach people, to like do whatever. And I'm kind of like, I'm glad that the climbing ecosystem has grown quite a lot. Just because 30 years ago it was literally impossible to make a living rock climbing. Like when I grew up, I didn't think that I could be a professional climber. Like, that didn't exist. It wasn't a thing.
Did you know any climbers?
No, my parents were both professors. They just took me to a climbing gym, and I was just like climbing, shredded tire floors, like padded whatever.
Yeah.
I was just a little
Your
kid.
siblings?
That was like, yeah, an older sister who climbed with me a tiny bit when we started, but she got into soccer and she like ran and stuff.
So athletic. She was athletic
No,
too?
not really.
No?
She just, I don't know. Both our parents were like professors.
What'd they teach?
No, my mom taught French and my dad taught ESL, like English as a second language.
Okay.
But they both taught at community college near the house.
So at 39 years old, you're sitting here. You're a professional climber. I'm assuming that's how you make your livelihood. And are you worried about a future? Like, are you worried about what's next for Alex Honnold? Like, or is this, you're just gonna ride this wave in terms of providing for your 3 and 1 year old child and your family? And is this?
No, I'm not that worried. At this point, we're doing fine. We save. If I had to, I could just write out some of my sponsorships, just like write out some of the contracts, and just, I don't know. And if it all fell apart, I'd get a job, like I don't know. I did 1 year of university. I was going to study to be an engineer. I'm sort of like, going back to college at 39, at 40, it's like not that crazy. I could always like learn something and do something else. But now if it all fell apart, I'm sure I'd get into business or something. I'd start something or work with somebody or who knows what.
You said something that I thought in the movie that I thought was really interesting. You said I was dreaming this idea for like 7 years. I just feel like most people, they have ideas and they don't execute them, or they don't spend that much time relating, like I write, right? And coming up with an idea is such a unconscious and conscious process that could take a long time, to where a story starts to kind of come into place and you're like, I feel connected enough to this, so I'm going to spend hours and hours and hours, putting this down. Do you remember the first time? Was your mind always working that way as a kid? Like when you would have an idea and then you would live with that and then you would eventually accomplish it?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I think really what you're asking kind of gets to the heart of the creative process in climbing.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, is interesting to think about, because I think climbing can often be kind of split between the artistic side. I mean, a lot of climbers view themselves as artists, where they're like painting on a canvas of the rock and it's like this beautiful artistic expression. Cool. But there's also a whole sort of engineering side to climbing, because a lot of climbing is problem solving and like figuring out how to do something. And a lot of climbers come at it more from sort of the engineering type side. I personally have always come at climbing more from sort of the athletic side. I think because I grew up as a kid going to a climbing gym, and I always saw climbing more as an athletic pursuit rather than like a artistic or spiritual pursuit. But it is interesting, your question around creativity, because I grew up, I was really into Legos and I love like building stuff and just creating and whatever. And I thought I was going to go to university to be a civil engineer, and I was always interested in like building things and just kind of creating. And I've actually sort of talked about this in the past with some friends, that I think one of the underappreciated aspects of being a professional climber is coming up with good ideas. Because really, if you're a professional climber, you're getting paid because you're doing things that people haven't done before. And that means thinking up stuff that people haven't done before. And sometimes that means thinking slightly outside the box. I mean, sometimes that's obvious because you just take what other people have done and you just do it a little harder, a little faster, a little better, like, better style, whatever. And so some of those ideas are obvious. But some of them are pretty freaking weird, or seem kind of fringe at first. But then, some ideas just grab hold. I mean, because you can go through tons of ideas, and then certain ones will really stick with you. You're like, oh. And I think the best ones are the ones that you sort of initially reject as impossible. And then you're like, no, but maybe it is possible. And then you're like, oh, I think it is possible. And then you're like, fuck, it is possible. Like, and then you feel obligated. You're like, you have to do it. Because you're like, oh, I don't know. I think there's a whole...
No, you said it, yeah. And then you're like, when I watched it there, it's like, it's fucking like Luke Skywalker, man. Like, in the van, like off on another planet, like doing the things, chopping wood, carrying water every day with the mountain just outside of the van, and like I'm coming for Vader, and I'm just like, it's incredible.
Yeah. I mean,
you a Star Wars fan?
Yeah. No, I got the whole metaphor.
What else do you like, dude? Like you climb. Like, what is your other? Like, do you have any? Is there other?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I watch movies. I like Star Wars. It's like a.
Are you into sci-fi, fantasy, or what? Like what?
Yeah. I watch things. Love The Witcher. I don't know. That's a fantasy show. It's like that's awesome. I watch stuff. Hang out with my wife and chill. Like I do all the other sort of like outdoor sports casually. I like trail run a little. I can like mountain bike all right. I ski poorly but enjoy it. All those kinds of things. I mean, I like. The thing is. All of those to me are like casual hobbies. Yeah. Because I spend all my time climbing. Like, I love climbing. And I also love being. Basically, it's really hard. It's particularly hard for me to be a good climber. I have friends who are just more physically gifted, where like they're just naturally super, super strong, and that's not me. And so for me to be good at rock climbing, it just takes a lot of effort. Like I have to train a lot. I have to climb all the time. I have to put in the effort. And even then, I'm still worse in many aspects of climbing than many of my friends. And you're sort of like, God, it's so frustrating that you can like work hard at something for 30 years and still be worse than your random buddy who works a 9 to 5, and you're just like, God damn it. But well,
then was there ever any resentment in the climbing world about if after this? I mean, did it win the Oscar? Or
won Academy Award.
And then with that comes your entire world just being swept up in that.
Yeah, thankfully I've never had to deal with that too much, because even climbers who are stronger than me and like better climbers than me, none of them look at the film Free Solo and think I could do that way better. And I'm like, oh, and there might be a few people in the world who maybe could do something like that if they tried hard enough or if they had the motivation or whatever, but none of them have tried, or none of them care. But even I don't know. Yeah, everybody sort of respects that and respects the
Yeah.
effort and the process. And I don't know.
The respect wins.
Yeah, I do. I've always been kind of grateful for that. That, you know, even like young upstart kids that are really freaking strong and who are for sure the future of climbing or whatever, they can still see the film and be like, "That's cool."
Right.
Like respect.
Right.
You know, like no one's talking trash or anything because you're like, that's. I mean, it's hard. You know, it's like.
It's hard, man.
Yeah.
There's this thing looming for me, which as I get older, around death, right? Like around this idea that we can't avoid the grave, and how are we going to spend our time? And I would assume, even on training days when you're going out and getting work in, right? Like something can go wrong, right? Like even on climbs that are not that.
In some ways, you're more likely to have accidents on like the normal boring days, you know. Like
So what is your relationship to fear, and what is your relationship to death?
I mean, well, I was kind of mentioned this in the chat that we had earlier. I mean, I think with death, I've just sort of like, we're all going to die. For sure, we're going to die. And so it's like, what do you do before then? And I think in some ways my thoughts, my opinion on that is slightly shaped. My father died unexpectedly when I was 19. He was 55 and he had a heart attack. He was like running through an airport and just fell over dead. And, you know, and I think for a teenager, and that sort of precipitated me dropping out of college and going rock climbing. At the time, I was just going to take a gap year, you know, or like take a year to go climb and take a semester off. And now it's been like 30 semesters off or whatever. I'm like going back any day, you know. But I think that, you know, my takeaway was just that you know, life is short. Life, you know, unexpected things happen, and to some extent, you just have to do the things that you're excited about doing, and, you know, follow your passion and like do. I mean, that's all cliche, but you know, it's a useful lesson to learn. You know, it's like sad to lose my dad at a young age, obviously, but on the other hand, you're like, well, it's an important lesson, and I think it helps you make the most of the time that you do have.
Did that experience at the time, like, was it like motivate you in some ways?
I mean, not exactly motivate, but I think it does help light a fire. Like it adds a time horizon to everything you're doing. You know, because there's so many things in life where you're like, and actually I'm sort of struggling with this now, living in Vegas. I'm like living a slightly more sedentary lifestyle because, not like sitting on my sofa, but I mean, I've been in one place. Like I lived in my van for 12 years and I was literally moving between climbing destinations nonstop and just climbing all the time. And now I live here in Vegas and I have 2 little kids and it's amazing and the local climbing is incredible, but I just spend so much more of my time just kind of training in the garage, kind of like open-ended. And all my projects that I have around town, I'm kind of like, well, if I don't do them this season, I'll do them next season because, you know, we're going to be here until the kids are 18 or whatever. I'm like, geez. And so there's way less time pressure on the stuff that I'm working on around here. And I think that's to my detriment in a lot of ways. You know, it's like I think when you can just push things into the future all the time, you just don't get as many things done.
Is that like because I wanted to ask you about, you know, your wife, and obviously she was featured very much in the documentary, but is that something that you guys have discussed to where it's like we're going to put roots down here? Because like you said, you've moved around and that's sort of your nature. Is that something that you sort of have conceded to her, that like we'll stay here until?
No, it's not even conceded. Actually, it's funny because she's actually maybe chafing more against us being here all the time than I am, because like I said, I lived in a van for 12 years. And then of those years, many of those years I was spending up to 5 or 6 months abroad during the year. So I traveled like widely as a professional climber. Excuse me. But so I've gone to, you know, like 45 countries or something, like put up new routes like all over, and new routes on all 7 continents, you know, just stuff like that. And, you know, my wife has traveled a bit, but not like that. And so she is a little more chafing, you know, where she's like, oh, I want to like go do cool things. And I'm kind of like, I'm fine. You know, I can hang out with the kids at home, and it's like, it's okay. Like we'll get out again eventually. I don't know. But no, I don't know. It's just a different season for life.
And I'm curious what your experience is too of us, just like, because we're both just like dumbfounded, being like, dude, like give us something that like we can hang on to say, like, because it's amazing. But in the doc you said when you were starting to date her, you know, which is interesting that this love came into your life as you were like trying to climb this thing.
Yeah, crazy timing.
But like, do you make anything of that, or you're like, were you more open to that because your focus? I mean, do you make anything of that?
No, that's a good question. That's interesting. I think, part of it is meeting the right person at the right time. And then part of it is also probably that the whole experience was so intense, not just of doing the free solo and doing the climb, but the filming was all pretty intense because like the filmers are just all up in your scene for 2 years. And then the whole film tour was so intense. And so in a way, it's like surviving this whole experience together, probably brought us closer. Like we went to the freaking Oscars together. We met Prince William and Princess Kate together, at the BAFTAs, the British Academy Awards, because the film won the BAFTA also,
Wow.
which is like the British equivalent. But so, the Prince, the Prince and Princess like greeted all the winners afterward, and we're like, what a cool, it's like you just have all these cool things together. And then that probably did help, like make the relationship more solid. I don't know. Though it was so stressful at the time.
Did you make a decision though? Because you said in the thing that you're, about the relationship, look, like I'm not going to give up climbing, and if I end up going off to climb and I, perish, you use the word perish in climbing, then, who's going to really care anyway? Like they're going to go on and go on with their lives. And then you had the accident with her, right, where you hurt your ankle. Mm-hmm. And you said, you were like, I like that almost was a reason for me to get out of this, but you didn't. Mm-hmm. And then you kept going. And now you have 2 amazing kids. Has your relationship or ideas about love and commitment changed?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, it's all good questions. I mean,
We're
a lot of it
you,
is
man.
just, what's that? Yeah,
We're
totally. No, it's just, I mean, a lot of that just is life, and actually it's interesting. I don't know if I'm just becoming slightly more middle-aged or just some of the stuff I've been reading, like various books and whatever, but I feel like so much of life is just choosing different paths. And I think in this case, I've just chosen a path where I'm like, this is a great woman that I love spending time with, and that I'm consistently happy with on a day-to-day. And you're sort of like, oh, I'm just going to choose to go down this path with her. And then it's like, oh, we're going to choose to have kids together, and that's like another fork in a road that we've chosen to go down. I'm kind of like pretty happy with all the forks. It's like I'm pretty deeply committed into this whole life that we have now, where it's like, oh, we have a home, and like her parents actually live right next to us also, and so it's like
cool.
We're really tight with the family, and my mom just moved to town, and so there's like way more family around, like good scene with the kids. It's all, but basically we've created this whole life, and I'm like, yeah, it's really different than living in a van and just sending the NAR nonstop, but I'm like, I don't know, it's pretty great. It's like we've just made different choices, and that's good too.
Has her feelings? Sorry, has her feelings changed about the climbing and the risks you take, or?
Well, I think the main thing is that she has a much broader understanding and appreciation. Like she has a better understanding of risk and risk taking and all that. Because I think that to the layperson, they're like, climbing, it's extreme. All the stuff you're doing is extreme. I think that she now has a pretty good understanding of when I'm doing something that's sketchy or when I'm not, or when I'm doing something that looks sketchy but just isn't, because it's totally chill for me.
Everything's sketchy, no?
No, a lot of it's like chill. Okay. I mean, like if I'm doing something for like, if I'm free soloing for like a TV commercial or something, it's not sketchy. It's like, like basically if there's a camera involved, it's probably not that sketchy.
Right.
Or like if it's a TV project, it's for sure not sketchy because like somebody had to freaking insure it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, but if it's something that I'm doing by myself because I think it's going to be sick, then she's like, oh, that could be kind of sketchy. And so like she has a much better understanding of like what's dangerous and what isn't. And, yeah, it's funny. The last couple of years, I've done 2 TV projects, like these Nat Geo TV shows. One, this expedition in Greenland called Arctic Ascent, and the other was like this big climb in Alaska. Anyway, so they're both like mainstream TV things on Disney Plus. Like they're cool, but they're edited in such a way that you're like, this is extreme. And I'm kind of like, if you're seeing it on television, it's not that extreme, because it means that there's a crew there, the crew's filming, everyone has insurance, like it's all covered through. It was like some attorney looked at everybody's contract, like. If it's on TV, it's not that hardcore. It's like the stuff that you're not seeing is when it's all getting crazy.
Your talk spoke to me today, and I had an experience listening to you because, so I don't expect you to know much about my story, but I went on TV in 2020 and kind of like went from no one really knowing who I was to having this like platform, right? And similar to your experience when the movie was released and you won an Oscar and you said you had this 6-month sabbatical to LA, and the way that you told that story, it sounded like once that sabbatical was over, like you didn't want any of that stuff. Like it was all like you didn't want to keep pursuing the fame and the fortune that could have come with that experience. And for me, I taste and still taste some of that, right? Like it's but I realized like that stuff doesn't make me happy. You know,
Totally.
it really doesn't. Like what makes me happy is, for me in my life, is watching someone else get sober. And I can't explain the feeling when I see someone whose life is being run by drugs and alcohol, and then coming out on the other side and building this life of purpose from basically nothing. And I'm very grateful that I heard you explain that experience, because for me, sitting there on those couches today listening to your talk, it really hit me like a ton of bricks. Like we only have so much time on this planet, and doing things that make me happy are important. To you, that's climbing, right? I mean, that's the thing that.
No, totally. I mean, you know, while I was doing my crazy, what I called my 6-month deployment to Hollywood, deployment, because I was like, I felt like I was assigned, you know, it was like, oh, you have to go to all these events, and I was like, this is crazy. But I was aware that it would be a once in a lifetime thing. You know, I was never going to make another film. Like, I'm not an actor. I can't freaking, you know, I can't deliver lines. Like, you know, I'm never going to do any of that kind of stuff. And so I was kind of like, this is a once in a lifetime thing. I just need to embrace it and just have this crazy experience. And, you know, we were meeting all these crazy A-list actors and things, you know, like I freaking was sitting at something. I bumped into, what's that guy's name? Bradley Cooper, really handsome, like really straight, like, Coop. You know, and I like was backing up my chair and I like ran into Bradley Cooper. I was like, what a dude, you know, cause he was on the same, that was the same year that A Star Was Born was doing like the Oscar run. Yeah. And so, you know, you just like run into these people and you're like, this is so cool. Like what a crazy life experience. But you know that it's just, you know, it's just a one-time thing. Like as I was doing it, I was like, man, I cannot believe that real actors like A-list celebrities do this every season. You know, like every time they have a good film, they have to do this whole crazy process over and over. I was like, holy shizzle, like that would suck your soul. But if it's the one time in your whole life, you're like, this is sick. Like, that's cool.
Yeah, but a lot of those people, their lives are taken away from them.
Well, totally. And that's why it's terrible. And I think that my whole scene is a good middle ground with that, where I'm like, you know, I'm well known enough to enjoy a lot of the perks of like, oh, I get some free things and I meet nice people and I go to cool places and I always have a good experience when I do, you know, it's like, it's nice, but it's not so crazy that I can't go to the grocery store or like can't take my kids to school or do whatever, you know? So I'm like, oh, this works out well.
I mean, you get recognized, right? I mean, that's,
yeah, like airports and public places and stuff for sure. But it's fine. It's never, you know, it's not a big deal.
It's climbers. There's people that.
No, it's like, it's mixed.
Yeah.
And actually, and part of that is because climbing has grown so much now. You know, that like the term climber means a lot more, is much broader than it used to be. Because like people that go to a gym or like their kid goes to a gym or something, you're like, that's a lot of people nowadays.
Is there anything that you're like afraid of that like is a fear that has just comes out of left field? Like, I'm afraid of spiders actually, or I'm afraid of flying. Is there anything like that?
No, I think I used to have a lot of that, not a lot, but some of that stuff when I was younger. Like, I used to be way more afraid of spiders, and I think that actually climbing has made a lot of that go away.
How? Why?
Just because you just spend so much time managing fear that you just start to evaluate your fears better.
Would you call it fear? I mean, like, you have such a different relationship to.
No, climbing is scary. Even normal climbing with a rope, with a partner, with everything, you still get into all these positions where you're like, this is really scary. Like yesterday, I did this thing that actually I was pretty proud of, like this sport route. So I was like climbing with a partner, I was tied into a rope. It was like day 4, day 5 on. I'm like pretty tired, but I only had one more day before I was leaving on this trip. So I went to this cliff to try to finish this route that I hadn't done. And when you're climbing it, the way the bolts are, like you're clipping your rope into these bolts, and it's all totally safe, normal. But the way you're clipping it and the way you're climbing it, your foot is kind of behind the rope sometimes, and if you fall that way, it can flip you over. It's like whatever. Uh-huh. And so as I'm climbing it, I was like kind of gripped the whole time because I'm like, oh, this is a weird position. Like, I don't want to fall like this because I'm going to flip all crazy. And it still would have been safe probably because the route is so steep, so overhanging that I wouldn't have hit the wall. Like, it'd be fine. But at the same time, you just don't know exactly what's going to happen, and so you're kind of scared. And so, you know, I managed to climb the route. Well, it took me 3 tries, but I did the route eventually. But I was like a little gripped every time I tried it. Also because it was a brand new route that one of my friends just put up a couple weeks ago. And so the edges are all still kind of friable and crumbly. It's like virgin rock that nobody's ever touched. and he's much shorter than I am, so he climbed it one way, but I was climbing it a pretty different way because I'm a different size, and so I was grabbing different holds, and so the stuff I was grabbing felt like it would break. Basically, all this to say that there's always uncertainty running through your mind, and you're always like a little scared and like not sure, and now you multiply that out over 30 years, you know, or even like today, I went on like a casual rest day hike, but we actually never even found the thing that we were attempting to climb up the mountain, and we wound up going up the descent by accident because we never actually found the real thing. And then we tried to pioneer this direct way back down because we wanted to make a nice loop instead of doing it out and back. And all that to say, there was a lot of uncertainty around the route finding, and then you know, my wife and my sister are not that solid on some of the scary scrambling terrain, and so, you know, I was like, oh, this is all like kind of exciting. And so when you have those kinds of slightly scary, slightly exciting experiences day in and day out all the time for 30 years, I think it just makes you better at parsing out the appropriate fears from the inappropriate fears, like the things that matter. I think about that all the time when I fly, because airports, I think, are a great case study in seeing people stressed about the wrong freaking things, or people who are just, you know, like people that don't fly that much, they're just anxious, you know, they're like tense. They're like, what if I miss the flight? And you're like, who cares? You know, you'll go eat a sandwich and you'll take the next one. Like, you're not in any danger. It's like, and being stressed about it isn't going to change the outcome one way or another. So you're kind of like, just let it play out and see what happens, you know? But then there are those rare times where if you hustle really hard, you can make it. And so it's like on those times, you should be the first person pushing her out of the plane and then literally running the whole length of the terminal. Because like basically there are very few times where the outcome is within your control. And when it is, then yeah, you should act appropriately. But otherwise, don't stress it. Anyway, I could just ramble about random stuff.
That's like what I'm thinking about is because you know, like when I wake up in the morning, a lot of times like I'm riddled with fear about things that probably fit into your box of
don't matter.
That don't matter. You know, like,
or that you shouldn't fear. You know, like I have later in life developed a fear of flying. And
that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make.
It's the safest form of transportation.
I know all the numbers.
I'm sure people tell you that.
I know all the numbers. It doesn't matter because it sort of goes back to that like dreaming up an idea. I get an intrusive thought, and it's worse when I'm flying with my family and my wife and kids. I get a thought that comes in, and like that thought just like starts pricking my body. And thankfully, I have the ability, the tools to sort of disassociate from my thinking and realize that like, I'm not these thoughts. This is safe. You're safe, but it's still just an irrational fear, you know. But I guess what you're saying is that I live with practical, realistic fears in terms of what could happen to me when I'm doing this so much that like I'm exposed to a level of fear in a way that just is different than the common person.
Yeah, I do think, and I think there's something to that, like actually being in real positions of consequence on a fairly regular basis makes all that other stuff just go away. You know, because you're like, you know, you're just not going to worry about flying because flying is so freaking safe if you're actually doing stuff where you're going to die. You know? Yeah. It's like, I don't know, like today randomly, so I was saying I was on this hike with my sister and my wife, and we were crossing this little slab thing, and my sister actually kind of like teetered backward and like looked like she was going to fall. I was like standing right below her trying to like hold her foot on this thing, trying to like help her down this deal. And basically she like almost fell backward, and I'm like, I maybe would have been able to kind of catch her a little or spot her, but she basically like would have just freaking fallen over me, and we both would have tumbled down the slab. Probably it would have been terrible. But then she kind of she caught her balance, and I kind of like pushed, and it all worked out fine. But we're both like, whoa, that was really scary. You know, you both get like a jolt of adrenaline, and you're kind of like, oh, that's a position of real consequence. You know, we're like, oh, like she almost made a mistake that would have potentially injured both of us a little bit, and you're like, oh, that's scary. But the idea of getting on a plane, I'm like, that's going to be so relaxing. I'm just going to take a nap the whole way. It's going to be so chill.
I know.
I'm sitting here just like envious of the way your mind works. And you probably don't acknowledge it or recognize it.
No, some of that I think I might just be a little lucky that I'm just not. Because living with my wife now for the last 10 years, I'm just way more cognizant of the way other people take in the world and experience things. Because like my wife, I think, is actually very well grounded. Like, you know, I mean, and if you've seen the film, you see that she's like pretty in touch. You know, she's great. Like but she's kind of like just a normal person in terms of like managing fear and anxiety and stuff. And she'll like often be awake at night, like stressing about a thing that doesn't freaking matter. And I'm kind of like, why? And it makes me thankful that I just don't have any of that, I think, to some extent. I mean, obviously I stress about stuff sometimes, but just doesn't seem to be a problem the way it is for other people.
Yeah, it's wild.
So if you know 5, 7, 10 years from now, son or two daughters, come to you, I'm going to climb. You have no...
Oh, I'd be so psyched.
Yeah.
I mean, but climbing is different than free soloing, and I'm sure, and I mean, my kids spend so much time outside that for sure they're going to be hiking, for sure we're going to be scrambling on rocks and doing stuff. And then there's this huge spectrum between scrambling to free soloing. I mean, because easy free soloing is, if you're a skilled rock climber, easy free soloing feels more like hiking or scrambling than it does like elite rock climbing. And so depending on where your skill level is, it doesn't, anyway. But I'm sure my kids will like dabble in all that kind of stuff. Whether or not they get into like hardcore climbing, I mean, that's totally their thing.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about like the impact you've had on this world and not knowing if you've recognized that, just even in that room. Like I come to a lot of these conferences and the round of applause you got after you made it to the top is not something that we see a lot in those
that's
rooms.
Because the music is so good.
Music is
the music is so good.
So good.
But every time I try to get you to accept that like you are this inspirational human, you're going to give credit to the music or...
Boy, it is great score. Freaking Marco Beltrami.
Did I get nominated that score?
But it should have, because documentaries film stuff doesn't the same way.
They still
but Marco, what a dude. He's like, the score is amazing. I mean, it's like, no, I'm proud of the climb and I'm glad that people appreciate it and whatever. But then you're like, part of the reason that film was so well received is because the film was so freaking good. The team making it did such a good job. The edit's amazing. The score is amazing. Like everything works so well. Because somebody could have made a bad film about that and it could have gone on YouTube or something and people would see it and be like, oh, that's cool. Like that's an impressive rock climb, but it wouldn't have had the emotional resonance that Free Solo did.
What is your relationship to your phone and social media? Like, do you have any?
I don't have any of the apps. I mean, I have profiles on all the apps and I actually pay a friend of mine to do the stuff for me. I write all the stuff and I send her the pictures and do all that, but I don't do it myself because I just get too sucked into like stuff that I don't care about.
So there you go. You are human in some ways. Like you.
Well, I used to just have the app.
We got it. We finally found the one thing.
Well,
social media. Leave it to social media.
Well, dude. Well, actually, so I don't know. A couple years ago, Instagram rolled out Reels or whatever, like the videos, and I remember I was like taking a dump, and I was like, "What's this?" And then like, an hour later, I tried to get off the John, and I was like, "Oh, my legs went numb and my back hurts," and I'm like, "What have I been doing?" And then I was like, "I hate myself," and then I erased the app. And so for a long time, I was like erasing the app and then reinstalling it every time I felt like I had to post something. Because part of being a professional athlete is that you kind of have to have some social media presence and post some stuff and do whatever. Yeah. But then I was like, this is kind of cumbersome because every time I have to reinstall and then sign back in. And then every time I'm going to post something, I wind up looking at like, oh, my friend has this new girlfriend. What's her deal? Blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, God, I hate this type of stuff. Like, why am I looking at stuff I don't care about? And so now, now I just send like batches of photos with captions to a friend of mine who manages all this stuff for me.
But you sent. I know we'll wrap soon, but I know you do a lot of work. You have a foundation. You didn't. I don't think you talked about it up there.
No, I didn't mention it. No.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how you got into that and what exactly it's towards climate activism?
Yeah, not even specifically climate, but so yeah, the Honnold Foundation supports community solar projects around the world. So it's basically energy access. Which is interesting because in the modern political world, climate is sort of polarizing in some ways, but energy independence, not polarizing. That's like downright libertarian or like conservative. It's like, just depends how you frame it. But basically, the Honnold Foundation supports community solar projects around the world. And so it's energy access, it's communities using solar or energy for whatever is useful for them. But so we've been funding, something like $2 million worth of projects around the world the last several years. But I started, I think, in 2012, so it's like, over a decade old.
Who runs that?
There's an executive director. There's a full-time staff of 6 or maybe 5 right now, but basically a small team. Giving out a couple million in grants every year, and yeah.
That's amazing. Did you vote
in the elections? Yeah, of course. I mean, in Nevada, it's super important.
Yeah,
but didn't really play out the way I was envisioning. But sort of like, wow. Though, so interesting talking about my foundation and talking about voting. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Like the grants that we give through the foundation are all sort of community led. It's like community led nonprofits, and you're sort of respecting people's autonomy to choose what they think is best for their community and respect like the way they think they can make their lives better. And I mean, this is like a huge zag in terms of conversation.
Let's zag.
But I'm sort of like, but like with the election, it's interesting. I've always like, voted, pretty left. I'm like pretty liberal person, pretty like whatever. I'm kind of like, maybe I should just take the same approach that I do with grantee partners through the foundation, where I'm kind of like, if this is what people think will make their lives better, then who am I to say that that's not what's going to make their life better? Like, let's let it play out and see what happens. And like, I personally feel pretty firmly that the direction that the government's going right now is like not the way. But I'm sort of like, well, a lot of people do think it might work, and I'm kind of like, okay, let's respect that and see how it plays out. And sort of like, I don't know, try to stay cautiously optimistic. Maybe it'll not be terrible, and like, we'll see. Already though, I'm sort of like, oh geez.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Zach won't go near this conversation.
What, the
That's
politics?
Fine. That's fine. But
I'm just a jellyfish, and I
will.
like, it's like, it's a,
Just,
you know, like,
adapt to any
well,
environment.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm just like, I think my brain just works differently. Whereas like, I think about, I want to be safe. I want to be able to do the things that I want to do. Maybe I'm not going to be safe one day. I don't know. But for today, like, I feel like I've been given a life where I'm pretty lucky, and there's a lot of people that are less fortunate than me. So like in this conversation, I can acknowledge, when you talk about like the cards that I've been dealt, like I've been dealt a pretty good hand, and I'm playing them to the best of my ability.
I mean, or you were dealt a really hard hand because you've had to overcome a lot. I assume. I don't know. I mean, I assume anyone in the recovery community is like has had to struggle with something and then overcome some big challenges, and you're sort of like, oh, is that being dealt a good hand because you were able to overcome, or is that being dealt a bad hand because you were forced to overcome? It's like.
Well, I think, I mean, like, we talk about this all the time. Like, for me, my greatest asset is my experience. I mean, like, in my 20s were riddled with a brain tumor and opioid addiction and mental health. And do I want to be here? Do I want to be alive? Do I not? And coming out of that, I've used all of that experience to my benefit, just like you have with climbing.
It was like you can call it luck, or you can call it, God, you can call it whatever you want. But at least in my experience, I'm 17 years sober too, and Zach is 13. Not everyone gets that window to help themselves or to allow themselves to be helped. And like in your experience, with losing your father like that, a lot of people they zag, right? They become very embittered and angry, and that's how there's a lot of trauma in this world that we come from, and so it's a lot of it is just your makeup, right? And also the way you were raised and values that sort of make this interesting cocktail where you respond to things in a different way, and you said it didn't motivate you necessarily, but like it shaped a fundamental idea.
Yeah, totally. You know what I find interesting though is hearing you say you're 17 years sober and you're 13 years, like my entire professional climate, like all the stuff I'm known for has all happened in the last 17 years. And kind of like in a way it's like so incredible to be like, oh, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I have a few friends that are like not necessarily struggling with addiction or like recovery stuff, but just kind of maybe in like a bad place in life. And you're sort of like, and they just don't quite know how to like turn it around. And you're sort of like, oh, it's so interesting to hear like, oh, and then I turned it around and had 17 years on a different path. And you're just like, it just goes to show that at no point in life is it not worth making a change and like making something better. Because you're like, man, 17 years on a different path is a long time. And you can do a lot of useful things in 17 years. You can like totally change your whole situation. So I'm like, basically my entire useful life has been 17 years. I'm sort of like, oh, glad that I was on a good path for it.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about, I've been climbing a bunch with this friend of mine. He's like been living in a trailer behind my house. He's just like, he's kind of like a day laborer type. He's a very strong climber, but he's basically just like sort of adrift. And he's like, just works as a day laborer and is kind of embittered about like, oh, I'm just going to like work until my body's broken and I have no prospects. And I'm sort of like, oh, it's just a good reminder that at no point in life is it not like worth making a change and going down a different path.
Yeah, well, your path is wild, and I mean, even the look. I mean, I can't. It's unbelievable, man.
Does that bother you at this? I mean, because like you are known for something. Are you like, oh God?
No, it's great. I mean, no, I'm glad. I mean, it's great. I don't know. I mean, like I was saying earlier, there's so many people on Earth. Like, there are going to be some people who are better at some things than others and worse at others. And I'm kind of like, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I wound up in a weird place, but it's freaking great. Love it. Like, that's fine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would be fortunate to have your approach to life and approach to living.
Do you have like a micro, macro, like, because you're at one, like when you see those photos, especially when they're pulling away and it's like you just like in space, like you could be on the moon,
Totally.
you know, but on the other hand, you like, I know that this is, yard 355 on the face. It's going to
Totally.
hook. So you have both of those things.
Well, actually, so one of the things I love about free soloing, and this is slightly different than what you're saying, but I love the sense of the very big and the very small, because one of the things that free soloing really does to you is that on the one hand, you're climbing this vertical rock face by yourself with no protection, and you're like, I am the fucking man. You're like, this is sick, and I'm living my best life, and I am rad. But then on the other hand, you're like, I'm this tiny, tiny little speck on this giant wall, and if I fell, no one's going to know, no one's going to care, like really, in the grand sense of like, you're just going to be an animal like splatting on the ground. And like, depending where you are, like what's left of your corpse is going to be eaten by animals, before anyone ever finds you. And you're just like, oh, you're just a little speck of cosmic dust in the grand scheme. And I think that soloing does an interesting job of kind of combining those two, where you're like, you feel so big and then you feel so small and insignificant. And it just reminds you of the whole scope of human experience, where you're sort of like, this is awesome, but I am just nothing in the grand scheme of things. And climbing in general does a lot of that, because you're like out climbing and you're like, this is such a great day and I'm so psyched. And then it gets really windy and you're like, now I'm really, really cold. And then it starts to rain and you're like, now I'm fucking worked.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, it just reminds you that, ultimately nature is in charge of all of it and you're just doing your best.
Last question. Are you spiritual? Like, do you believe in
God? I definitely don't believe in God. I don't subscribe to any organized religion. I mean, it depends what you mean by spiritual. I was technically raised Catholic. Like my mom is Polish and was all like old world, like, they're all Catholic. But no. And so I've always considered myself like a pretty serious atheist. I think as I've gotten older, I'm sort of more like open to the inexplainable, or, I'm like, who knows? And I'm definitely less opposed to religion, because I feel like it can help some people in the right ways, maybe. But I feel like it's also, I don't know. Yeah, but I'm not that spiritual. But depending how you describe it, because I've had so many really powerful experiences in nature where you feel sort of at touch with the world around you, and like, you feel a sense of oneness. And I mean, that's basically what people describe as spirituality. So it kind of depends what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just don't believe that I would have been, I don't think I was that powerful enough to get sober. I believe that I needed a source, a power outside of me, whether that be God or something from the universe. And that's why I don't question it. And I sit here talking to you, and I just believe that on this path that you are on, that there's something divinely inspired about the things that you've been able to do. And I'm not here to say it's God, but there's something working in your favor to accomplish the things.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be totally comfortable. Like, I have been very inspired by the grandeur of nature in certain ways, which, you could ascribe to whatever. I don't know. I really don't like dogmatic spiritual belief. I mean, like the Catholic faith with all kinds of crazy saints and like, it's just insane. And so, I think dogmatic religious belief, I think I'm just too contrarian for that kind of stuff, where you're like, wait, you're telling me that these are the rules because somebody wrote them down thousands of years ago? You're like, well, which translation? Like, which version do you want to read? Like, that sounds like bullshit.
Right.
It's like, I'm just too contrary for that kind of stuff. But I'm totally fine with, it's like, we live in a beautiful world, a beautiful universe. Like, there's a lot going on that we don't understand. It inspires us in different ways. I'm like, yeah, I totally, I believe in that.
I mean, dude, you have been very gracious with your time. I don't think you understand how gracious to come here and do this with us and speak to the conference. And so I want to share some gratitude for you and your story and what you've been able to accomplish, and just the inspiration that you've not only provided me today, but the rest of the people that you've come in touch with. So,
no, thank you. No, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I'm sort of like, I had an amazing morning out hiking with my family. I came down here, met really nice people, had a nice chat. I'm like, what a nice day. Go home and actually I go home and frantically pack because I'm supposed to be climbing something kind of serious tomorrow. And I'm like, I need to figure out what we're doing. But yeah, super psyched.
Well, we'll let you know. We're gonna do an Alex Honnold tomorrow. I think a bunch of us are gonna wake up early and drive out to some some rocks and see if we can.
If you make it to that trail, when you look across from you, there'll be all these inspiring mountains. There's this one big wall looming in the back. I'm going to be climbing that tomorrow.
We'll look for you.
But I'll probably be starting roughly when you guys are finishing, because you guys have a whole day of work ahead of you. Whereas, and I don't want to go out when it's too cold, just because for what we're climbing, you just don't want to.
Well, we appreciate you, man. This was awesome, and I hope we can stay in touch. Thanks.
No, it's a total pleasure. It's really nice chatting.
Thanks,
man.
Alex.